Hello everyone, welcome back to Reddit now. I'm your host Peter, and today we're looking at r/ProRevenge. Don't announce your engagement at someone else's wedding, or this might just happen to you. Last summer I was at a cousin's wedding. His bride and her family had been close with ours since before I was born, and the couple had known each other since they were toddlers, so it was a particularly exciting event for both sides of the family. However, after the ceremony was over and the party had only just started, one of the bridesmaids decided to announce her own engagement. The attention was immediately taken away from the newlyweds and brought to the bridesmaid, who I'll call Sarah, and her equally smug fiancé. My cousin's wife, I'll call her Emma, didn't make a scene or utter a single negative word about Sarah. She looked like she was on the verge of tears, but she kept grinning and acted very happy for the other couple. This was unusual, as Emma is typically quite confrontational and speaks her mind no matter what the consequences. Sarah later picked Emma to be the maid of honour at her own wedding, which took place last weekend. I wasn't there for it, but my cousin sent me some of the best bits on Snapchat and explained the whole situation. This is where the fun begins. Emma's two much younger sisters were the flower girls at Sarah's wedding. At the very last moment, Emma switched out the white petals in their basket to the blue ones she had secretly brought with her. She told her sisters not to say anything about it or let the bride see them until it was time to scatter them down the aisle. She looked very confused upon seeing the blue petals, which didn't coordinate whatsoever with her theme, but of course she didn't say anything about it in the moment. Most of Sarah's other bridesmaids were also Emma's friends, had attended Emma's wedding, and were in on Emma's scheme. At the reception, Emma's sisters and the other bridesmaids were tight-lipped when Sarah began demanding to know why there were blue petals. The wedding planner ended up getting a lot of abuse for not checking the flower girls' baskets before they walked down the aisle. Finally, it was time for the speeches. The speeches took place in front of a massive screen, displaying a loop of photos with Sarah and her husband, which had been compiled by Emma. Emma took the remote that controlled the presentation screen, and at first, she showed some pre-approved humorous photos of Sarah with Emma and other friends to facilitate a couple of light-hearted jokes. Then, at the very end, Emma said to Sarah that she must be wondering why there were blue petals instead of the white petals originally planned. That was when Emma displayed the last slide from her presentation. Emma announced in front of everyone that she was 5 months pregnant and that she'd just discovered the baby was a boy, hence the blue petals. The last slide? Her ultrasound picture. There were shocked yells and gasps. Sarah had a fit, but those involved in the scheme cheered so loudly that I sincerely regret watching the Snapchat recordings with headphones. Apparently, Sarah had been very nasty to her bridesmaids before, driving several of them away and forcing the others to pay ridiculous amounts of money for dresses. Emma and my cousin were eventually thrown out of the party, but they were all smiles. Sarah's fuming mother went to confront her outside, and Emma retorted with, "Gentle, gentle, I'm pregnant." I reckon Sarah doesn't speak to the majority of those bridesmaids anymore. Too long didn't read. Self-important bridesmaid announces her engagement at my cousin's wedding, stealing the spotlight from him and his bride. Said bridesmaid foolishly names my cousin's wife her maid of honour and behaves like a complete bridezilla. Cousin's wife sabotages her wedding to announce her own pregnancy. The time I ruined my high school teacher's career and got her fired in the greatest way possible. This story is widely known amongst my family and is constantly brought up and joked upon in my group of friends even years later. A buddy of mine suggested that this is the perfect place to make it public, so let's get into this shitstorm. Backstory. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I had never been the brightest student. I was a solid C student, and I had never received a detention or any kind of bad student record. This is important because to this day, I still have no idea why the teacher treated me this way. The teacher, who we will name Miss Frank, had been a teacher there for more than a decade and was widely known for being a pretty heartless dog, who the administrators saw as the golden child. Miss Frank taught algebra, which is my worst subject, so naturally I had issues understanding the lessons and would ask questions frequently. To some, these questions are easily answered, but to me it was rocket science. Usually, when someone asks a dumb question, no one should address it. However, in Mrs. Frank's class, she would belittle me in front of everyone by saying things such as, "And here comes the slow boy again. Wow, surprised you don't understand it again. Really? We have to go extra slow for you today, don't we?" Etc, etc. I tried going to the administration about it before, but again, she was considered the golden child. They would send someone in to examine her during class. She would act respectful and normal for one day, and then go back to being a dog the next. This goes on for about half a year, until I had enough. I went to the local Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she would throw at me. I would sometimes instigate them to make up for the loss of time. Go ahead, feed the fire. Fast forward to the end of the year, and I'm sitting in Miss Frank's class when I ask a question. Her response, and I quote, because it's burned into my brain, was, "I've been teaching here for over 10 years, and that was the single dumbest question I've ever heard come from anyone's mouth." She continued the lesson without answering. I calmly stood up, packed up my stuff, and headed to the nurse's office to dismiss myself from school. We were allowed to dismiss ourselves if we were 18. I went home, compiled all of the brutal tapes into one glorious masterpiece, and headed back the next day to show the administrators. I sat down with the principal and we listened to a couple of the insults before he stopped me. He wanted more witnesses present, as well as Miss Franks. He told me we would meet up the next day where I could show him and the rest of the administrators the full tape. I walk into school the next morning, being the most nervous I've ever been for anything. I was called down to the office where I met with some board directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal, and Miss Franks. What follows were some of the greatest minutes of my life. I watched as the administrators went from fed up with being in another useless meeting to furious and speechless, with some of them keeping their mouths open for the duration of the tape. I also watched Miss Frank go from confident and stuck up to her realizing that she had ducked up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself in front of the most important people from the district. The tape ended, and without hesitation, the administrators looked around in astonishment, and the principal turns to me and says, "I think we have heard everything we need to. Thank you." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The final time I saw Miss Frank was leaving the room. I looked back and we made eye contact through her tear-filled eyes as I gave her the biggest, most evil smile. I returned to class the next week and Miss Frank was nowhere to be found. The story spread quickly throughout the school and I was seen as a saint. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it impossible for Miss Frank to return to her teaching career, as well as cut off most of her connections she had with other teachers in the school. I had ruined her financially because no school district in the area would hire this walking piece of garbage. If you're reading this, Miss Frank, I'd like to take this moment to tell you to go duck yourself. Too long, didn't read. My high school teacher belittled me all year. I secretly recorded her, showed the administrators, and got her fired. Edit 1. Should have cleared this up in this story, however I didn't want to go into too much detail about the process. Yes, this was perfectly legal to do, and my parents and I did our research to make sure we weren't breaking any kind of law. In my state, you can record someone in their place of business without parties' consent. Edit 2. I believe this post became popular because almost everyone can relate to having a horrible teacher at one point in their life. I'm glad I could give some satisfaction to some of you who had similar situations. Thank you for all your great feedback. Edit number 3. I want to address some frequently asked questions. I regret sharing the dumbed down version because I left out the amount of shit I put my parents through during all of this. Tons of meetings and phone calls that would have made the story a lot longer, and I don't think anyone would have enjoyed reading. Number 1. I do not still have the tapes. It was in the administration's best interest to keep them in case she sued for false termination, and it would have gotten out of hand if the tapes spread and gave a bad reputation towards the district. Even if I kept the tapes, this took place over 15 years ago, and there's no way in hell I would be able to find them. Number 2. Yes, I took algebra as a senior because again, I wasn't the greatest student to walk those halls, and throughout all my years of school I had tutoring. I'm sorry, I'm not a genius. Number 3. I don't remember what question I asked that pushed me over the limit that day. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of this Reddit Now video. If you enjoy this style of content, hit subscribe as I'll try and upload as much as possible in the coming weeks. If you're watching this video in the background, make sure you quickly tab back in and hit like, as it really helps support me and my channel. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.